So let us make a start. My apologies for having connection difficulties. Very, very good to see all of you. Many thanks for joining us today. My name is Mul Haq. I'm director of the International Center for Climate Change and Development. And this is the beginning of what we are planning to make into a series of discussions in the format of webinars, but they are more interactive discussions than presentations about how do we build up long-term capacity in least developed countries to tackle the impacts of climate change. And we all agree that capacity building is required. We all agree capacity building requires continuous effort. It's not a one-time effort. And so we are looking at a 10-year time horizon for enabling the least developed countries to capacitate themselves to deal with the impacts of climate change. And the LDC, what we will do is I will give a very brief introduction to this discussion. I will then invite my colleague, Professor Mizan Khan, who coordinates the Least Developed Countries Universities Consortium on Climate Change, or LUC, many of whose members are going to be speaking in today's meeting. And then I will invite our illustrious invited speakers. I won't list them all now. I'll introduce each of them when I give them the floor to share some thoughts on what they feel is the way forward in terms of what do we need to prioritize, because capacity building requirement is huge, the gaps are huge. We need to prioritize what we can do immediately, and then how do we make that happen. And so just to give a little bit of a background, the Least Developed Countries Group is a formally recognized United Nations group under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. There are 48 LDCs, most of them in sub-Saharan Africa, but also a number in Asia, including Bangladesh. And it is a formal negotiating bloc under the UNFCCC, currently chaired by Bhutan. And under Bhutan's leadership and also the previous leadership of Ethiopia, the LDC group has actually initiated 3 major LDC-led and South-South knowledge sharing initiatives. The first one is on renewable energy. It's called Renewable Energy Action to promote renewable energy in the least developed countries. The second one is more recent. It has just started recently. It's called Life AR. It focuses on adaptation and resilience, and we are very happy to have with us Tracy Kajumba from IIED, who coordinates the activities under that, and I hope she can share some of her plans and expectations under that. And then the third one, which we organize, and Professor Mizan is the coordinator of, is the LDC Universities Consortium, whose focus is capacity building. So the LUC Consortium is very much supporting the Life AR on adaptation resilience and the RE initiative on renewable energy. And it focuses on building national capacity to develop the abilities to cope with the impacts of climate change, both on mitigation as well as on adaptation. But being vulnerable countries, adaptation is a much higher priority than mitigation. And so that is the framing of the background. It is a South-South initiative of the least developed countries. There's no northern donor, although we are very happy to have partners to support us in our activities, but it is very much a South-South initiative driven by the LDCs themselves. And we are now starting this series of webinar discussions. We have already done one. In fact, a week ago, we did one for Bangladesh with government and other stakeholder groups in Bangladesh. So we have kicked off the discussion in Bangladesh. Today's one is a broader kickoff with least developed countries more generally, and we have a number of representatives from a variety of countries who will speak. And then we hope that each of the LDC countries, with our LUC partners as the leaders, will initiate a national webinar series now that most countries are in some form of lockdown and are working online, we'll do a country-by-country series of discussions on prioritizing capacity for investment in capacity building to tackle the impacts of climate change. And so I'm really very happy to see that you have agreed to join this conversation, and I hope you will also be willing to continue with us in this journey. I call it a 10-year journey to achieve resilience in our least developed countries by the end of December 31st, 2030. So it's actually longer than 10 years, but let's call it a 10-year journey, which we will officially, by the way, launch in January next year at the Gobeshona conference. So this is all leading up to a major launch of this initiative of the LUC partner institutions in January.
We do not hear you, Dr. Salim.
Maybe his audio has a problem.
Yeah.
Fahad, can you check with him?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, he was loading the slides.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, Fahad is sharing the screen. Yeah. So, Dr. Salim, can we start? Yeah.
I'm very sorry, I lost the connection for a little bit.
Yeah.
So without further ado, let me invite Professor Mizan Khan to give his first presentation, which he has collaborated with David Mifun-Mkazi from Makerere University. And then I'll invite each of the speakers to share their thoughts one by one. Mizan, please go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Salim. Dear partners from the LUC countries, we are very happy to have you with us. So this presentation has been shared with you some days back. And as the last slide you have seen, we have a few publications on capacity building for the last few years. And this presentation kind of is a synopsis of the paper that we have published in climate policy. Here myself, David, and Dr. Salim are the co-authors. So, and this presentation represents our main thoughts of the publications that we have seen, including a book that we have published. We have written and published by Routledge from London 2 years back. So, next slide. I will not take much time because you have gone through, so we will expect your comments from comments on these, and also what capacity needs your country have and the gaps, etc. So why capacity building is needed, we all understand, but here are some figures that we have added that over 2/3 of the developing countries put capacity building as a condition to implementation of the NDCs. And in fact, about 83% of the LDCs have expressed capacity building as a condition. But NDC in Bangladesh was not very strong in projecting capacity needs. And for conditional emissions reduction, where we have projected that 10% of the emissions can be reduced upon support from industrial countries, there we have put as one of 10 areas for capacity building and the area of institutional capacity building. So, and this means, this continued demand means that there was not something good in the past, because otherwise this continued demand would not have continued. So we have tried to analyze that, and we raised the questions, 3 questions. What are the capacity building needs to address climate change? And what are the matches and mismatches between past efforts and the articulations expressed in the NDCs, and what kind of capacity building can address the current needs. So go to next page. And you know Articles 11, 12, and 13 of the Parish Agreement present the capacity building ideas and the provisions in the Parish Agreement. So based on the climate regime, you know Article 6 of the UNFCCC dealt mainly with education, training, and public awareness, which we have now in Article 12. But Article 11, for the first time, has a dedicated one for capacity building, and Article 13 is about capacity building for transparency. And based on review of these and from the NDCs, we have found out these are the elements of capacity building: education, training, public awareness, institutional capacity, research and development, and also we have added generic and specific capacities, because these are some of these elements are needed for generic capacities, which are needed for general education and training. But specific capacities here we need for addressing a specific problem like climate change. And go to next. Next slide. Fahad. Okay. So capacity building is a very capacious framework, very extensive framework, which does not give into a very tight definition, extremely impervious to a tight definition. You cannot exactly define it. But out of the review that we have done, more than 20 definitions, we have found UNDP definition a little better, best of the lot, because it includes levels of capacity building. It refers to it as a process. It includes the element of sustainability. It includes the capacity to do something. Capacity is the ability to do something. So all these areas are captured in this definition. And the specific types of capacities that are needed for addressing climate change, here we have categorized, classified into 3 groups. First, we have to understand the problem in all its dimensions. Climate change is kind of a multi-level, multi-dimensional problem. And for understanding requires a lot of good knowledge and understanding, and the impacts and the resulting vulnerabilities in your countries, in your sectors of the economy and the livelihoods of the people. And based on that understanding, you have to build, you have to develop policies, strategies, plans, as well as a roadmap for implementation. And then also climate diplomacy is a very important part of this whole exercise, because diplomacy, is an extension of your national interests beyond your country's border. So in climate negotiations, what we do usually is to kind of reach a consensus based on enlightened self-interest, and also try to promote our national perspective, national interest. So these are the broad 3 kinds of capacities specific to the climate change. Okay, go to next slide. Yeah, so here in 2 columns, we have tried to put forward what was the past experience and what is needed. For example, what is in the Parish Agreement and in the NDCs. So look at the left column. What was the past experience? It was short-term, ad hoc, foreign-driven, consultancy-based. Then funding was very short for 2-3 years, where national consultants even took a backseat because foreign consultants led the process in the saddle. And the training programs, usually it was based mostly on workshop module and trainings, 2, 3, 4 days trainings, comprising of a number of stakeholders, including government officials. But what, for example, government officials got training, they have been capacitated to some extent, and they are a transferable job, that is their nature. So they are like flying birds. They have to move from one ministry, one agency to another. So that is why capacity building is not usually retained in the traditional system. Money is spent, but not much system was left behind. That was our indicator of whether a capacity building system is there or not. That is the main indicator to look at. And in the Parish agreement and in the NDCs, as I have mentioned, but there was, in the NDCs, there was some problem that the NDC articulations are very generic, general, not specific, not aligned to the specific sectors, for example, or not aligned to the cost, how much money will be needed, not based on any cost estimation. So we hope next round of NDCs will have better articulation, and in our paper we have made a suggestion that the UNFCCC Secretariat can take preparation of a guidance, for example, a guideline to address capacity building in the next round of NDCs. Thank you. Next slide. Next, yeah. So we have reviewed about 66 developing country NDCs in our paper. And there, based on frequency of expressions and needs, you can see the sectors mentioned in the NDCs. Obviously, the first sector is agriculture, and that is, I think, applicable for all the LDCs. The agriculture, then energy, water, forestry, and other sectors. And this is for right reasons, but because our economies still are dependent on climate-sensitive sectors like agriculture, energy in terms of biomass too, and water and forestry. So these are the sectors that have been highlighted in the NDCs for capacity building arenas. Okay, go to next slide. Yeah. And in our thinking, in our publications, we have highlighted these 4 elements of capacity building as a framework. We have proposed it as a framework that we have suggested for a capacity building framework at the Secretariat, because hundreds of agencies are involved in capacity building activities. Even within the UNFCCC, 13 agencies and funds 13 programs and funds are involved in capacity building. So there is no coordination and coherence, overlaps and repetitions. That is why we have suggested for a capacity building mechanism at the convention, and this can be done at 0 cost, because if we can shred off the overlaps and repetitions from other programs and agencies, we can have good enough money to run this mechanism at the UNFCCC Secretariat, where PCCB can serve as an advisory body. PCCB is not an executing body or a really coordinating body in that sense, because it is an ad hoc advisory group. So PCCB will stay where it is, and they will have much better role, but Secretariat will have the coordinating role with a permanent staff. And then financing is a serious factor, because for capacity building, we need sustainable financing. Capacity building is not a one-off stroke that through some workshops we got capacity built. It's a process. So at least 5 to 7, 10 years program we must have, because we have to see whether capacity building, we have an outcome, for example, an impact of the capacity building activities that were done. But earlier, there was no system of monitoring and evaluation of capacity building. Institutions. But the problem is those training institutions don't have the deeper kind of training modules, because government officials, they need to be jack of all trades in the sense as policymakers, they need to know a little of everything. And so the training programs are not deep, but for understanding climate change at the most diabolically complex problem, we need to go deeper. That is why we need both formal and informal education, where universities must play the central hub. Governments will stay, governments will be there as the administrative hub, as the coordinating hub. But universities, historically, as the repositories and generator of new knowledge, must play a bigger role. But unfortunately, donors did not support these universities for addressing climate change. In the form of some projects in partnership with some foreign universities, we had sometimes some universities had little funding, but not dedicated funding to universities, except NORAD. NORAD, for example, dedicatedly funded some university programs, including degree programs, but no other multilateral or bilateral agencies had funding for universities. And obviously, we need networks and partnerships. And our LAC is based very much on this understanding that LAC as a South-South platform will promote capacity building in our countries and beyond, based on a partnership with the northern universities and other southern universities. Fahad? Any problem with uploading the next slide? Okay. So this is an infographic where we try to capture, we try to synthesize our thoughts. This is something we have tried, and we will welcome from you partners to make comments on this infographic, how we can make it better, so that people, because nowadays many people, busy people, don't have much time to read all these big papers, voluminous papers. So infographic is a way of communicating complex and voluminous things in easier ways. So we will welcome your comments on this infographic, whether all the elements and parameters and dimensions of capacity building have been captured under this infographic or not. So, okay, Fahad, you can go to next slides. And monitoring, evaluation, and dimensions of capacity building in terms of not just capacity building, but capacity utilization and capacity retention are also big challenges in our countries, because we don't have much system of capacity retention, and capacity utilization also, not the right people at the right time at the right place always happens. That needs to be also taken care of if we want to have maximum benefit from capacity, existing capacities built already. So our conclusion is, you understand there is high demand for capacity building, but details and the specificity of those needs are lacking, with no clear indication of modalities and resources to realize them. So I have mentioned, but one lacuna, inadequacy in the developing country, and this is was there, that it did not align the issue of transparency of action and support. And this is very important, because if we have our transparency of action, particularly of support, then we can have the best value out of the money invested, either domestic money or supported from donors, doesn't matter. We will have better results out of the limited resources that we have. So this is very important. So these are the ideas that we have suggested for and about the framework. So this is what we wanted to share with you. And the questions that we have put forward in your universities, in your countries, for example, what are the capacities you feel are the needs, and what are the gaps, that we will be very happy to hear from you today. So thank you very much, dear audience. So this is about my...
Thank you very much, Mizan. I hope people can hear me now. I'm afraid I'm having some problems with my internet connection, so I'm not going to use my camera. Good. Okay. Thank you very much, Mizan. So now what I would like to do is to turn the floor to your co-author, David Mufundikiza from Makerere, who has been a key partner and originator of the LUC initiative together with ICCCAD, to maybe add a few thoughts from your side, David. Would like to share some thoughts? David, you have the floor.
Yeah, many thanks, Salim, and very many thanks, Nizan. And I think my work is really very much easy because Mizan has elaborated and reflected the thoughts and that we had as we were putting up this paper and the other literature available. Maybe what I will quickly ask Fahad is to put on the slide which has the graph. Put up the graph, the slide which has the graph, so that I can quickly kind of underscore some things. Fahad, do you think you can put that slide on screen? The slide with a graph.
Yeah. That graph on sectors.
Yeah, graph.
Yeah. So go back a little. Go back.
Yeah, so essentially, as Fahad tries to get to the slide, thank you very much.
Yeah.
And number one, because as Salim was setting the tone of this webinar, he talked about the priorities, and of course these priorities need to begin from where we are, and Mizan has said, this most of this work is contextualized in the LDCs, which are assumed to be nationally one of the ways of kind of having a national leadership in the implementation of the Paris Agreement. Now, if you look at this graph, a number of messages come out on what we probably as LDCs need to focus on. One, like Mizan indicated, you can find that first bar on your left is that essentially we don't know. We know there is a problem, we need to build capacity, but there is an issue of not knowing exactly what kind of capacity we want to do and do it where. So I think this is an issue that needs attention, especially for universities, with the highlight that there is some information that is missing, but also showing that there's a disconnect between national level climate change efforts and what realities exactly that are happening in most of these countries. That's a huge percentage of information that could not be very well clarified, such that if you're talking about partnership, which kind of partnership would you be attracting? If you're talking about financing, what kind of areas would you be looking at? So that's an issue that needs our attention, to come up with specific information with the various sectors and see how this information can be availed to attract partnerships, financing, and appropriate responses as may be needed. The other thing, and not surprising, of course, is the prominence of agricultural sectors. This is for sure almost all LDCs that are largely dependent on agriculture as a sector, and with a very high population involved in this agricultural sector. And this reflects the vulnerabilities in this area. And I would think in terms of sector priority, agriculture comes out clearly to be one of the areas that we may want to underscore if we are to look at all these aspects that have been indicated to do with education, training, awareness, institutional capacity, research, technology development, and with that context, we go to provide information that can ensure that efforts are meeting that important priority in the least developed countries. So with that in mind, of course, we see that these needs are cross-cutting as well. It's not like they're isolated. I've talked about agriculture. These needs are cross-cutting, meaning that even the capacity building arrangement should not be operated in a silo arrangement. It should be with integrated thinking. Even when we think about priorities, we need to see how we do cross-sector, we do cross-scale arrangements in the approaches that we take in capacity building. And in terms of stakeholders, is that one thing for sure is that one of the key stakeholders among the various stakeholders across scales and across sectors, one of the key stakeholders are local governments, because this is where adaptation, specifically in my focus, like you see, and like Mizan said, most of the efforts are on adaptation. Most of the needs are on adaptation, also indicated in this graphic. So the thinking here is that very critical are local actors, local governments, grassroots organizations and communities. Those are likely to be most important actors, so that these everything that happens is linked, but linked based on realities and context-specific aspects at local level and the community level. In terms of capacities needed, I think, like I've indicated, we need to have information on actionable risk awareness and what is happening with the communities and local governments and local levels to deal with all the aspects to bring about the risk, climate risk, into response planning, implementation, and then also learning from the implementation processes. And of course, that require looking at personnel, local governments, where adaptation is supposed to be facilitated from. The personnel skills, knowledge, and attitudes are not well aligned to the magnitude of the task at hand. And I think this will be something very important for universities to build, to make sure that in our training programs, we ensure that we are building partners and intentionally bring people from local governments through short trainings, through awareness and involvement in defining research questions, so that ideally we'll have institutional arrangements that cater things like personnel that go to address these concerns at local level. And then finally, I think the issue of having needs assessment. I think even when we talk about research, I think universities, we need to endeavor to do context-specific needs assessment, capacity building assessments, to see what exactly realities on ground are, so that whatever we do is very much targeted, but also as a way of helping government, so that, for example, in the next round of NDCs, we'll be able to be informed, so that we have a different position than what we have here, where you have most of the capacity building needs are not known and not specific. So I think, and of course, with the more focus on important sectors, and like I've said, the most important sector that comes out is the agriculture sector, but in a way that understands that, for example, agriculture sector needs to look at the value chain, infrastructure and transport. So it's agriculture could be the entry point, but in various ways of looking at it from the agricultural production chain, so that this is not done in a sterile arrangement. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, David, for that. I understand I'm not the only one with internet difficulties. Some other people are having the same thing. So what I would suggest is people can put their cameras and mics off until you have to speak, and then you can turn it on. Hopefully that will decrease the bandwidth requirements. So I would now like to invite Tracy Kajumba, who is the principal researcher at the International Institute for Environment and Development in the UK, to share with us a little bit about the latest situation with regards to the LIFE AR program, which focuses on adaptation and resilience, which is also another one of the parallel LDC-led South-South initiatives that IIED is helping to coordinate. And in particular, Tracy, if you could maybe also speak to, first of all, how it's going, where you are in the process, but also what your thoughts are on how the capacity building elements on adaptation and resilience under LIFE AR can be prioritized as well. And then finally, where you feel that we as the LUC partners might be able to play a role in supporting you both across all the LDCs, but also on a country by country basis as you develop each country LIFE AR project going forward. So Tracy, please go ahead, you have the floor.
Thank you, Dr. Salim. Maybe a little bit of introduction. LifeAir is Least Developed Countries Initiative on Adaptation and Resilience. For those who might not have heard about it, and this is purely an LDC-led initiative developed by the LDCs and really looking at the terms, how the LDCs want to work. It has front runners, the countries that came forward to sort of pilot the initiative. So for now, there are 7 countries: Uganda, Tanzania, Ethiopia, Malawi, the Gambia, Burkina Faso, and Bhutan. We are still at very initial starting stages, but the strategy has been developed and the LDCs have worked around this. This is the 3rd year, but taking time to really plan what they want to do and how they want to do it, looking at the needs of the LDCs. And focusing specifically on the capacity building. We don't even have the term capacity building. It's a sort of a work program on a community of practice. And the LDCs in this LifeAir actually use strengthening capabilities instead of capacity building, because the belief is that we have capacity in the LDCs, but we need to strengthen that capacity. So that's why we look at capabilities, which looks at really building on what we have, how do we do it better, and all the partnerships and support that David and Mizan have already talked about. So in LifeAir, the LDC group talks about strengthening climate capabilities, institutions, knowledge, skills, and learning. And they also want to focus it in the long term to strengthen national and local institution capabilities, because as everybody else has said, that projectized sectoral way of working has really failed. And this initiative came up after the LDCs realizing that the business as usual is really not working of the small projects that we do on adaptation. Adaptation is long-term and needs long-term responses. Whether on building resilience or building capabilities, it's all long-term. And then also the recognition that we need to work at the pace of individual LDCs, because they are at different levels. There are those that have stronger capabilities and those that are still struggling, either fragile states, or they're dealing with conflict, or they're dealing with different other things that really pull them back. So, but the purpose is to aim at building long-term national and local institutions for those LDCs that are also not at the same level as others, so that no LDC is left behind. And on the community of practice, what the initiative looks at is distilling the good practice within the LDCs. It's not that we need to learn from outside. There's a lot of knowledge, a lot of things going on. But how do we distill the good practice to inform the LDC-wide learning and the good practices, and develop the guidance and the peer support within the LDCs? Because we know there are those that are doing well and those that are somewhere coming up. So that's where the LAC as a long-term initiative of the LDC group becomes relevant to support this long-term process of such kind of how do we distill the good practice, how do we build that up into supporting others to move along the way. And then we need also the learning to enable adaptive management. And this means that we need to generate the learning processes in sort of making it an iterative process where we have robust analysis and M&E and evidence that informs decision making in the face of uncertainty, because most of the time it's like we don't have information, we don't have the skills, we don't know what to do. So how do we support that within the LDC so that there's learning and system building and monitoring? The other area is LifeAir hopes to inform the global good practice through robust evaluation and monitoring, and that should also be for capacity building and looking at effective mechanisms that capture tacit learning on how to support countries And the support, as David has said, should really be informed by the LDC needs and priorities. Because most of the time we've had projects doing capacity building. It's the designers of the project that decide which capacity they are going to build. As David said, we don't do the needs assessment to know why are we building the capacity and for what are the gaps. So somehow we sort of take on what has been given to us, and it doesn't help us learn within the context that we are dealing with. And then also inclusivity is important. Like I said earlier, how do you make sure that those in conflict or those that are fragile are not left behind? And then in Life AR, we also think that government alone does not have the solutions. So the LDC group is promoting a whole of society approach where civil society and private sector and universities and everybody else comes in to work together towards supporting resilience and adaptive capacity. But then most of the times we think of capacity building and we're thinking of a school and a university and people going into the classroom and being taught. But here we are looking at strengthening capabilities of all those groups, the grassroots groups, the civil society networks, the private sector, to work together and sort of aggregate what is happening at country level into the climate work that is going on. The question of the capacities that need to be built, I would still say that this should be based on the priorities and needs of those that need their capabilities strengthened, but not prescriptive, because we have a course and we are doing this, so we should teach it. If we could look at the gaps at country level in terms of policy, institutions, and both local and national, that would be a starting point even for universities to think of what are the relevant courses that we need to promote, maybe with government or with civil society and others that are responding to the country needs to address climate change. And then there are lots of issues when it comes to climate change in the LDCs, access and generation of information, the need for research and evidence. And like I said earlier, we speak of capabilities, not capacity. We have grassroots organizations that we are working with, for example, who are trying in their own way to generate information and collect data at community level, but they may not do it as well as the universities are doing it. And this is information that would inform adaptation planning. So if the universities came in and worked with those small organizations, then would be able to have information at country level that really informs policy development and practice based on really community needs and priorities and the real issues, because they are the ones that are really impacted by climate. So I think this touches all of us, whether we are researchers or universities. We need to sort of decolonize the thinking about capacity building, being in a classroom and learning about a theory, to going down to the ground and understanding the real issues, to co-design research programs that inform what the local groups are doing as society, but also feeding into the national priorities on where they want capabilities strengthened to be able to tackle capacity issues. And lastly, as I finish on the advice that is needed, is one, to respect the needs and priorities of the LDCs, whether government or NGOs or whatever. The capacity building or the capabilities we need strengthen needs to be really based on their needs, not because we have a program and we have some fund tagged capacity building, and then we say we are going to train people on this. That has evidence shows that it has not worked over the years, and we need to plan in the long term so that we are not just looking at a one-off, but we are looking at systems changes. We are looking at having champions that are able to take this work forward. And like I said earlier, to decolonize capacity building, we need to understand the context, the challenges, and also the local knowledge. There's a lot of information that communities have that could help us adapt, but sometimes we feel because we are researchers, we are lecturers, this is not relevant for us. We've seen lots of communities with information on local indigenous knowledge on weather forecasting, for example. And it's good the IPCC is starting to recognize that. So we really need to bring this into our models and learn with communities and try to address these issues. Technologies have been introduced that don't work in the context. Because we don't consult, we feel like we know it all. So the consultation, the needs assessment still becomes very important. It needs to be inclusive. We don't look at capacity and think we need graduates to do that. Focus on women, youth, which the university can really play a big role there. Grassroots would help us sort of have a holistic and concerted effort on addressing climate change. And the nature of capacity building should be that which strengthens capabilities and empowers, looking at individual agencies, looking at institutional, looking at the partnerships and how we relate. It's not about north, south. It can be south, south, it can be south, north. But what is the partnership and the relationship, and what is the need and priority for each of the partners that are engaged in that?
Thank you.
And then supporting climate leadership is important. We've seen small local organizations that has become bigger with individuals that really have a strong voice and can influence policy. And I think in this journey, we need to identify such people who can also sort of replicate what they are doing and what they know, and work with them to have a bigger mass of people that are supporting adaptation. And lastly, tracking the impacts of capacity building is really important. We've done so much, but we don't know what impact is there. So as we talk about the MAIL, we need to track the MAIL for capacity building as well. Are we progressing, or we are just talking about the same things? So
Thank
yeah,
you.
I think that's what I would give us the things that we really need to think about.
Excellent. Thank you very much,
Dr.
Tracy.
Salim.
That was extremely useful and very good food for thought. A couple of things from our side. Firstly, absolutely agree. That is, in fact, the philosophy of LUC. It is strengthening capabilities. We use capacity building because that's a more generally known term, but our interpretation is strengthening capabilities, and it is all of society. And one of our focuses, being universities, are young people. Our students are going to become the leaders of our countries over the next 10 years, both the girls and the boys. And they are a very, very prime group for us to focus our attention on. Not that it isn't needed elsewhere, but this is something that we can do as in our day jobs, which we can focus our own capabilities and capacities on. So thank you very much, Tracy, and we look forward to continuing to collaborate with you and the front-runner countries that are already making progress on the LifeAR program as we go forward. You mentioned the IPCC. We are very fortunate to have one of our LUC partners from the University of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, Professor Pius Yanda, with us. He is the Vice Chair of the IPCC Working Group 2. So I would like to now invite Pius. I understand, Pius, you may be having difficulty with your internet. If you can unmute your mic and speak, please go ahead. If you want to use the camera, please do so, but I leave it to you to share some thoughts, and if you can make them within 5 minutes, that would be very good for us to enable the other speakers to come in as well. Professor Yanda, are you on the line? Are you able to speak? If Pius is not on the line, then let me move forward to the next speaker on my list, which is from Mozambique. We have actually 2 speakers from Mozambique. I will invite both of them to go one after the other. The first one is Luis Artur, who is the Dean, Faculty of Agriculture, Forestry and Engineering at the Eduardo Mondlane University in Mozambique. And then he will be followed by his colleague Rostamate, who is a senior lecturer in the same university. So Luis, are you with us? Can you go ahead? Please unmute your mic and go ahead.
Thank you, Salim, and hi to everyone. This is Luis speaking from Mozambique. Well, I think the presentation was
go ahead.
Clear.
You need to unmute your mic.
Can you hear me?
We hear you. Go ahead.
Go ahead, yes.
Thank you. I was saying that Mizan has given us a good framework for understanding capacity or capability development. And Trace has made additional points which definitely we need to think of. And well, looking at the Mozambican context, and it comes to me two main elements which eventually should share that. The first one is the kind of illusion of lack of capability or of capacity. What I mean by that is, well, depending on who is coming and is proposing capacity development, local people intelligently, they will allow you to do whatever you want, not because you don't have capacity, but because they're trying to find ways and maneuvering space to have the resources and the means that that intervention is bringing in. I have come across again and again with local organizations and local institutions and people saying, well, that capacity was not really needed, that because the agenda was already set in, so we gave them that illusion of lack of capacity. So I think, and I agree very much with all participants, especially David, when he said, well, capacity building need, first of all, to have an assessment of what kind of needs are required. And that will take us to understand whether there is really need of capacity development, of capability development, or we have to reframe and to do something else. And second is the enabling environment for the capability development to happen. I mean, we can have good ideas, but how is international landscape, national landscape built and set it so that you can allow whatever it's coming in, especially this bottom-up approach to take shape and to be part of the capacity development that we are talking about. So I think if the mindset from the proponents is more in terms of we're going to provide you with capacity building, so we're not adding really what we are expecting to happen. So in that case, I really very much agree with Trace when he say about decolonizing the way we're thinking about capability development. So the capability development is to look at the enabling environment which allow that bottom-up approaches and formal and informal ways of doing capability development are happening. So instead of going into trying to ask and see what kind of capability development are required, I would rather focus first on what kind of institutional setup and policy is an enabling environment is there that allow the process to take place instead of looking at the results, which is just providing the training either formal or informally. That is the last thing that I'm really worried. It's about providing the training. What I'm really very much worried is the process of providing that training. Thank you. I will stop by now.
Thank you very much, Luis. Some very, very useful thoughts, and again, pointing out the same mismatch between the supplier of capacity building and the demand for capacity building that Tracy also mentioned. Let me now move to Rosta. Rosta is also from the Eduardo Mondlane University in Mozambique. Rosta, would you like to add your thoughts to what Luis just said? Rosta, you have the floor.
Thanks, Salim. Yes, I will add as well.
Go ahead.
On the capacity needs. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead. We can hear you.
Okay. So I wanted to share on the capacity needs at the institutional level. So looking at the capacity needs that we see at the Mozambican, most of the NDCs, the documents requesting support. So we do have as well this mismatch in terms of what is available because we don't have a proper mapping of capacity, but as well we don't have a proper database of information of what is available, if that specific capacity have been already covered or not, or what is actual. So we do have this repetitive funding sometimes, overlapping of funding for institutions, but also for individuals, which also doesn't allow us to have this a more broad capacity improvement in institution, but as well as the individual level. But we do as well as see, of course, that the need of more capacity building, because working with the NDCs, but also now working with the biannual updates, we see that we have a lack of data. So we have a very higher uncertainty, for instance, for some of the sector of more needs of funding like forestry and agriculture, or the follow sector in general, which for us, having in the loop of those data, where the data comes from, when we look at the bottom of the problem is the disconnect between the local availability of data and a communication at the top level, or we don't have that flow of information from the top, but also the community are not aware of the data needs, even grassroots. So we do have information, but then it's not in the format that is desired for what is needed for climate action in terms of policy, but as well in terms of reporting in some of our compromises with the convention or the different convention. That will be also my points on that. What can be improved? Learning from other countries where they have a straight link between the industry and research. It enables us to not be in more of requesting fund or looking for external funds, but supplying or responding to actual demand in terms of capacity, or solving real problems with the industry, enable this incoming funding without us as universities or researchers going to look for it. So we have to make ourselves, for me, I think it's also a learning that comes from this type of collaboration, where we have to make ourselves as researchers more useful and relevant to the actor that we work with, either if it's a government body, it's a private sector, and local community especially, has stressed by other speakers. They do have a lot of knowledge. They know most of the things. They have been through 1,000 funds for similar capacity development, but it's not reliable. It hasn't been so sustainable. They keep themselves in the loop of new funding, and we will behave as we haven't gone through this type of funding. So for me, it's proper information, improving awareness campaigns on that, but also strengthening the link between research community, local community, and also the decision-making has overall. So I will stop on that, and thanks for the time and listening.
Thank you very much, Rosta, for sharing your thoughts. Is Pius back with us? I'm not seeing his name. If not, then let me invite Om Katel from Bhutan. Om is also one of our LUC partners. He's the Dean of Research in the College of Natural Resources at the Royal University, Bhutan. So Om, please go ahead. You have the floor.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, it's raining quite heavily here outside, and then I'm just looking at the rains, and it has been a regular routine for quite some days now. Of course, this year, relatively rain has come quicker than the previous years. And then we see that farmers are quite happy this year, but because of this lockdown, there was a little bit of difficulties, but eventually farmers are a little happy because the vegetables used to come to Bhutan, quite a significant amount of, significant quantity of vegetables from India that is imported, but because of the pandemic, the farmers actually saw the opportunity, and they started working in the field, and we see that we started getting this organic farm, organic vegetables nearby our homes, and then we are happy. Farmers also say that they are happy because they have increased their earning a little bit. But because of this pandemic, the issue of climate change has somehow forgotten quite some time. And maybe I'll share what is happening in Bhutan in the last, in the recent months or so, and then how is Bhutan approaching to address the impacts of climate change. Recently, UNDP has organized one workshop, and then the idea was to develop a roadmap for the next 10 years or so. That's less than 10 years actually, until 2030. How we can actually build a resilience, how we can address impacts of climate change through different modalities, different strategies. So they did invited many other stakeholders and also invited universities this time. And this is the I think this is the first time they have formally invited the university to ask, as an university, what kind of capacity or how can you help us in building this roadmap and then beyond. So, and then there is also a kind of circular from the government asking the different stakeholders to come up with a committee called Climate Change Committee, which would be installed at the local level. And then hopefully that is going to link this different stakeholders, different organizations, and then fill the gap of capacity, and then the information gap, and then needs gap, things like that. And recently I was also looking at our 5-year plans. Our 5-year plans in Bhutan started in 1960s, and 2013 to 18 was the 11th 5-year plan, and that was the first time government has actually included some of the climate drivers to incorporate in their planning. And then in 12th 5-year plan, which is the current plan, that is 2018 to 2023, government has included quite a number of climate drivers in their planning. So it has actually improved quite a lot in terms of government trying to address the issues of climate change through their planning. Of course, there are some gaps and issues. I'll talk in a minute about that. But before that, I would like to share that recently, Prime Minister, our Prime Minister, Bhutanese Prime Minister, Prime Minister of Bhutan was interviewed by one of the journalists, and then he was saying that Bhutan has done so much that the rest of the world should learn from us, especially in terms of ecosystem-based adaptation. But we have done nothing, and we have impacted the most. And as a small country, we have small GDP, and we have difficulties in addressing these issues. So the industrialized countries should look into the efforts, the level of efforts that we are putting in, and then there should be some kind of support to help us, upscale the activities, so that other countries who are also looking for some kind of ideas can also learn from Bhutan. That's what Prime Minister said. And when I was listening to Professor Mizan and then David, the issues the climate change is impacting in the graph that is shown shows that agriculture is the foremost issues. And similar to Bhutan, agriculture, energy, that is hydropower, because our water comes from the Himalayas, the glacier melts, and then that comes to the hydropower, and then there is a high risk and hazards, and then the forest. And these I see in most of the LDCs, these are the issues, and these are common. And one little unique about Bhutan is that the Glof glacier lake outburst floods, which the glacier melts, forms a lake, and then this bursts and then comes down, because most of the communities are living on the riverbank, and then there is a high level of risk. So how to address these issues, that is a little bit unique for Bhutan, probably similar to Nepal. And then they call this as a tsunami from sky. And when we talk about these issues, Tracy also touched on the issues of the local level capacities. We have one small project, and my campus actually they implemented this project, and then we see that farmers, they already have the capacities. They know which crops to plant, when to plant, and then when to harvest. What kind of farming system is required. And then, of course, sometimes they do not know why this is happening. Probably capacity building is required to make them understand why this is happening. But what is happening, they have a huge amount of knowledge than the development partners, government agencies. Even I should say, in terms of traditional knowledge, farmers have rich knowledge, and there should be a link somehow, a platform that can link between these grassroots level organizations, especially farmers, the policymakers, government agencies, development partners, and the universities who can actually look at different issues and incorporate in their curriculum. So in Bhutanese case also, this is there, that some capacities are already there, but we need to actually somehow create a platform where these capacities can be actually enhanced, so that this can serve the purpose for the long-term, can be streamlined into long-term climate change impact plans. And then when I talk about my university, it's just about 17 years old, and definitely there is the research is one of the high-end agenda that needs to be built. And another thing is private sector development, where private sector development is relatively very weak in South Asian countries. Probably among the LDC countries, Bhutan could be one of the countries with very weak private sector development. So these private sector, universities, policymakers, there has to be some kind of link in terms of collaboration in the sense that data sharing, understanding loss and damage, understanding how can the different sectors can actually take responsibilities on, for example, implementation, research on the same thing. And I can tell you that, like Rosta also mentioned that and also Tracy included this one, it's similar actually, like in Bhutan, there are so many organizations, and in every organizations, there is a research section, which means everybody does research. And then we see that there is a little bit weak on dissemination part, where these organizations collect data, and then this information collects dust and then remains there, and there is not much sharing among the organizations across the sectors. So how to achieve this at different sections? If a platform could be created where the stakeholder national level, and then even beyond national level, the kind of a platform is created could help to address these issues. For example, here snow melts in Bhutan, the water flows from Bhutan to India, and then India to Bangladesh. So all of these three countries is actually affected. So there should be a kind of data sharing between at the trans-boundary level. So which means I'm not talking about local level, but it has to be also at the national level, then to the trans-boundary level. So this having a platform and how to share, and then how to bring these different people, policymakers, grassroots organizations, academics would actually help the purpose. So specifically, I would like to share this in institutional arrangement, probably dividing the task. Somebody does research on climate change, and how does this actually research can help the policymakers, making the people responsible in terms of implementation, generation of data, and then dissemination. If this can be shared across agencies, could actually help to build. Yeah, I think the last point to talk about, we have our campus is the only campus in Bhutan having a degree that is bachelor's level degree program on climate change. But there is recently the National Environment Commission, which is the UNFCCC focal point in Bhutan, also asked us, okay, what kind of short courses can you give us so that we can actually send people there to build the capacities. So in that context, Bhutan is also looking at, okay, we need to actually build the capacities of universities so that university can be a hub for the capacity building in terms of research and knowledge, so that it can be shared across the other organizations. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Om, for that. And one of the things that for our participants is that in the LUC initiative, each of the individual universities in each of the countries is leading a South-South initiative across all the LUC partners on one aspect of climate change. One of the themes that we are all interested in working on is nature-based solutions or ecosystem-based adaptation. And Om Katel and his university in Bhutan are leading that on our behalf. And so we all want to learn from Bhutan. We do recognize Bhutan's leading position in nature-based solutions, probably the leader in the whole world. And we all want to learn from them. I will now open up for questions and comments, but I see that we have several of our LUC partners on the call. I would like to give them a few minutes each to share some thoughts. I'll start with Professor Siddharth Yaffa from the Gambia, and then I see we have Professor Sanjay from Nepal, and also Professor Noor Ahmed from Afghanistan. So let us start with Siddharth. If you'd like to share some thoughts, you have the floor. Please unmute your microphone. Siddharth, are you still with us? If Siddharth is not here, then let me move on to Professor Sanjay from Nepal. Are you with us?
Yes, I am here.
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Haq and other colleagues, to see you again after the Goweshana conference in Dhaka. Thank you very much for this very important and interesting webinar, which is very useful for all of us. During the presentation, I think it was very nicely articulated the importance and the approach for the capacity development in our countries, and particularly the role of the universities to develop it as a national hub in relation to the capacity development. In my university, let me start it that way. In my university, I think we informed earlier also, we have already developed a master's program on climate change, and which is in the final stage of the approval from the academic council that is going on. In general, many of the points which I thought could be shared has already come. Just to reiterate all those points is, I think in our countries, we have been doing this capacity building activities from different agencies, including universities in the formal sector. There are NGOs in the government sector, and many of us may not have the clear picture of what is the real status, what is going on around. So if we can have a kind of national scenario on the capacities that help us to focus on the specific needs and requirements on the whatever capacity build-up activities you want to do. So that is one point I want to make. And another is, Om also mentioned about the local knowledge and documentation. Still, there is only limited documentation on the local knowledge and adaptations on the climate change. So if they are properly being documented, and many of them which we can validate and use as a tool in the coming days also. So that is another aspects of the improvement. I also believe that the universities should be the core for the knowledge generation and then the skill generation for the specific countries, and then transfer of these knowledges. So I think one of the main concern for all of us could be how we develop a very strong link to all these government and other agencies and the universities to build this capacity build-up program in a more stronger and robust way. I think these are some of my general observations. And thank you very much for this very important webinar being organized. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Sanjay, for sharing your thoughts, and congratulations on getting your master's degree program approved and ready to go. I would now like to invite, I see that we have Professor Nur Ahmad from Afghanistan, University of Kabul. Nur Ahmad, would you like to share some thoughts? If so, please unmute your mic and please go ahead.
Yes, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for your, hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, I would like to thanks all of the members, and especially the Professor Sabiul Haq and all the members from the world. It's very nice. There was a very nice presentation and very good job was done actually in the LDC member countries. I really appreciate their work. About Afghanistan, I would like to very shortly give the information about the Kabul University and the climate and the environment sectional faculty established here was in 2013, and we have 3 departments: environmental protection, natural resources management, and disaster management, which is all interconnected from environmental point of view. Actually, I heard much from our member in LDC country. They did very much and very nice on the climate change mitigation and adaptation, and also the initiative for the effective adaptation and resilience. We would like to learn from them. Actually, as you know better, unfortunately, we are facing in a very bad situation of war and distraction. We were not able to have more time to invest in this section, but we are happy that beside you and beside our LDC member country, we would like to learn their experience and develop beside this and with their effort. Actually, the most important thing was one was the resilience to climate change. It is very important in Afghanistan. We have a number of opportunity, and it need a little bit educational practice. And in Kabul University also, we need the capacity building. We are trying to connecting from a different way with this network to have more practice and the capacity building for our young generation and student. This is my first time, and I have learned many from the website of ICCCAD. I would like to follow up with the session and the future session and activity of this initiative, and I will be part of you. And thanks for your cooperation. And I would like to have your cooperation with our development. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Nur Ahmad. And we welcome you to the LUC initiative, and we look forward to continuing to work with you at the University of Kabul and helping Afghanistan develop capacity as well. I see that Professor Siddharth Yaffa is back with us. Siddharth, would you like to share some thoughts? Please unmute your microphone.
Yes.
Go
Can
ahead.
you hear me?
Yes, we can hear
Sorry,
you.
I had a power outage from in my office. I apologize for that. Thank you very much, Salim, for coordinating this training, and also Prof. Mizan. Your presentation was very good, and I hope you will share with us, because you asked a question, especially on your slide that says capacity building to address climate change. What other institutions can we include in that list? I think that would be helpful. I can share my thought on that if you share that presentation with us. And for David, his presentation also, he has asked a couple of questions. If you can share those questions, then I can give you my feedback as to number of institutions that we can, for example, stakeholder institutions that would need capacity building. For example, in the Gambian context, I can give you some examples on that. And when it comes to Tracy's presentation, very good, Tracy from IIED, you asked one of the questions, that was how to support other LDCs in the capacity building efforts. I think the first step is to establish LOC in LDCs that don't have LOC chapters in there. For example, in West Africa, Salim and I, we started introducing LOC in Liberia, University of Liberia. Because of LOC, that our efforts there have been hampered, slowed down. So because I wanted to go to Sierra Leone also, and also in Guinea-Bissau and Guinea-Conakry, so that we can cover the whole of West Africa on LOC. I think after COVID-19, hopefully, we'll have more time to get around all those countries, especially in Kabul, in Afghanistan, for example. We need to go and set up LOC over there. So that will be the first step in helping those least developed countries in that capacity building. And in terms of relationship, building a relationship with other institutions to have a synergy on this capacity building. I'll give you one example. In West Africa, 11 out of the 15 countries in West Africa, we have WASCAL there, WASCAL. You can check it online, wascal.org, which stands for West African Science Center for Climate Change and Adapted Land Use. This is a German-funded training program in the whole of West Africa. Funding comes from, 80% of the funding comes from German Ministry of Education and Research, BMBF. We can collaborate with them. They have a very strong footprint in West Africa on climate change capacity building. For example, University of the Gambia, we conduct training on climate change and education. We have successfully run 2 batches at master's degree level. Now we have upgraded that this year to a PhD, and our students are on board. They're taking their courses, and we can do that too. And also because of this funding from Germany, Germans are interested in starting another program. That's a master's program by January 2021 on climate change and renewable energy. So we can collaborate with WASCAL in proposal writing to get funding for our capacity initiatives in West Africa. If you look at the whole of West Africa, we have 15 countries. Only 2 countries are developing countries. That is Nigeria and Ghana. The rest are least developed countries, like the Gambia. So we can do that. LOC has a strong, very strong in local adaptation. WASCAL is not strong in local adaptation. LOC is very strong in climate change negotiations. WASCAL is not strong in climate change negotiations. However, WASCAL is strong in climate change research. And WASCAL is present in West Africa, and they're also present in Southern Africa, which we call SASCAL. You can check both of them. And we have a collaboration with those 2 institutions, WASCAL and SASCAL. I think we'll be able to win in so many areas on climate change capacity building. So that's what I have for now. Thank you very much.
Excellent, Siddharth. If I can ask you to follow up with Mizan and myself on that, we should definitely reach out to WASCAL and SASCAL and collaborate with LAC, and also maybe even with BMBF and see whether they might be interested in a new program with an LDC focus as well going forward. So thank you very much. I think, we're coming to the end of our time. There are a number of questions and comments in the chat box. I'm afraid we won't have time to deal with them now. But as I said, this is the beginning of a conversation, and we hope that we will be able to continue this conversation. We will be sending out emails with information, the presentation, as well as the comments to everybody. We hope you will continue to participate with us in the future ones. For my LUC colleagues, let me just tell you a little bit about the plans going forward. One of the things that we plan to do is to bring all of us together in the January Gobeshona conference. We are planning a session for LUC, which is going to focus on locally led adaptation, and in particular on the role of universities in doing the monitoring, evaluation, and learning, with the focus on learning of locally led adaptation, focusing on community-based adaptation as well. So we will be in touch with you about running that session. I will invite you now, each of you, to think about a presentation that you can make for that session and share that with us, and we will take that forward in future as well. At the same time, we are also going to participate, hopefully, in the 14th International Conference on Community-Based Adaptation, which is now going to be a virtual event. Last year, we met at the 13th conference in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. This year was supposed to have been in May in Bangkok, but because of COVID, it got postponed, and it's now going to be a virtual event organized by IIED from the 21st to the 24th of September. Again, we hope that the LUC partners can play a role there. Also, again, focusing on the monitoring, evaluation, and learning of locally led adaptation in particular. That is going to be the focus of our own particular research work going forward. So with that, let me thank the speakers, thank Professor Mizan for the presentation along with David. Thank you all the participants who joined us. We hope this was an informative and useful webinar for you. And for my LUC colleagues from each of the countries, I would invite you to think about doing a national focused webinar like this, bringing in your different stakeholders. We discussed different kinds of stakeholders, from people working at the local level, from national level, from different sectors, agriculture, water, etc., government, non-government, private sector, communities, etc. Think about who you might be able to bring together and see whether you can initiate a national conversation about addressing the issue of capacity building or capability strengthening, as Tracy has improved the language on, and see where people think that the highest priority should be and where the biggest gaps are. One of the problems with doing a gap analysis is that everything is a gap. The gaps are so huge, and if you are coming with a tiny piece of activity, knowing the whole gamut of gaps does not really help you. So you have to look at the gaps that you are able to address. And we are a set of researchers in universities. We do teaching and we do research. Those are our two tools and skill sets. The question for us is, how can we use those two tools most effectively in the context of each of our countries, but then also collectively across all the LDCs, so that we learn from each other in a very effective South-South manner. So I'll bring proceedings to a close here. Thank everybody for joining us, and we hope that you will continue to support and join our future webinars as we organize them as well. All the best to everybody.